Okay.
Yay!
Cheryl, I have to take a picture with the slide behind me.
Okay.
So I'm going to go down at that level. And if you don't mind coming down
Sure.
at that level too. It's just that with the lighting sometimes it's
Good evening and welcome to Keese School. Tonight we have a person that this is their fourth talk at Keese School. One of them, she probably has a limit of having the fewest people because we only had 4 people during one of her talks during the COVID. But anyway, Cheryl is a Cultural Resource Museum Manager of the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, Department of Parks, Montgomery County. She has 25 years of experience working in the museum administration and education. She directs interpretive program staff and has a number of parks around Montgomery County. The talk, well, I'll let her explain the talk. And let's welcome Cheryl. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you, Jim, for that introduction. And no, I don't drink any of my interpretive staff, nor do we drink anything but water while we are at work. What I do is I do direct the staff who manage our 5 historic sites and include 2 of our largest museums, gems of the county, I like to call them. And so it is a pleasure to be back at the Keese School and share with you all a little information about what the history is in your own backyard here. And so tonight, because I like to celebrate Women's History Month all year long. I like to celebrate African American History Month all year long. I like to celebrate all of the heritage months all year long. And because of that, I wanted to share with you all this evening Women of the Underground Railroad. And what it is a part of a series of talks that I've done in the past and that I still do that focus on from slavery to freedom. And it highlights this African American experiences within Montgomery County. And so tonight we're going to begin with the Underground Railroad. And this is one of my favorite images of the Underground Railroad. It's an illustration from the New Yorker from the 2016 edition by Lee Gouldig. Can you all hear me okay? I'll try and move with the mic. Okay. I am sometimes really moving about, but I'm going to stand still tonight. And so, because I am an educator, I will often throughout this talk ask questions of you all so that you may participate and you're not just going to sit there and listen to me talk at you all evening. So I want to know a little bit of what you know about the Underground Railroad and what it is. So if you can just, yell out for me what you know about the Underground Railroad. Who can tell me what is it? Give me some clues. It's an escape. It's an escape for who? For the enslaved, yes. Yes, sir. For many, it's escape all the way to Canada. Okay, what else is it?
A network of people.
A network of people, absolutely. And then what else embodies the Underground Railroad? Hope. Oh, wow, that is really powerful. And something that we forget, that hope is a key element of the Underground Railroad. What else? Oh, that North Star, that bright, beaming symbol, that celestial landmark that guides us northward. And then what about the knowledge of this Underground Railroad, especially during the 19th century? Everybody know about it? A few people know about it? Well, there is an idea of quilts, but the biggest part, we have some involvement with Quakers as abolitionists, the secrecy of it. What the Underground Railroad is this loose network. It's a secret network. You don't tell everybody about it. Some people knew about it, not a lot of people. But where you find a lot of the activity is going to be north of that Mason-Dixon line. Once you leave Maryland, you cross over into Northern Territory, then it gets really active. It gets really bustling. And the goal, that hope that someone mentioned, is to get to freedom. It is who is helping these folks get to freedom, the enslaved Africans, and getting them to freedom. Now, here in Montgomery County, that point of escape and that point of freedom that we're trying to get to is just about 50 miles away. From Sandy Spring, it is about 47.5 miles to Littleton, Pennsylvania, which is, by today's walking standards, you could do it in a day if you're following the highway all the way up. But if we go back 200 years, 150 years, it's going to probably take you about 2 days, depending on how you travel. The other thing about the Underground Railroad here in Montgomery County and its relationship to us is we have also in that Sandy Spring area near you all the northwest branch of the Anacostia River in that watershed that moves through actually one of your parks, the Woodlawn Manor Cultural Park. What used to be a little more water coming through there is right now kind of a stream, and it runs through the former plantation of Dr. William Palmer there in Sandy Spring. But we know through oral histories and documentation of those freedom seekers that were making their way north, coming up and following that Anacostia River through into Montgomery County, onward into Howard and Carroll, and moving up and crossing the border, getting into Pennsylvania and making it into Northern Territory. So who makes the escape to freedom? Who goes? Who escapes? During the colonial time periods, mostly you're going to find single men who are making the escape. This is an image, one of the favored of a family that is making an escape to freedom. Do you think that this is a frequent occurrence? No, why not? I hear large groups of people. What else? It's very dangerous. It's dangerous for one, even more dangerous for 3 or more and children going. What makes it so dangerous? Abilities. The dangers. The dangers include slave catchers, those that would catch them, children, that babies, especially the noises, they're not understanding the ability and when to be quiet, when to move, exhaustion that's going to take in. For those who are very, very, very much senior and could be infirm, they may not be able to make a long journey. So these are some of the factors that could prohibit a family from making it. But if you're trying to get to freedom, you will do just about anything. I like to take this image of a family and give you one example of a family from Montgomery County who escaped actually from Kentucky, and that's the Reverend Josiah Henson, who his wife Charlotte, and their 4 children escaped from Kentucky. That's 6 people going to Kentucky, 2 small children, 2 older boys that have made a 600-mile journey to Canada as a family unit. Everybody went, everybody made it. So it could be done. But tonight, I want to focus on the sisters. We women, what did we do? What roles did we play during the Underground Railroad? One of the things that I want to highlight is this woman's place. And some of my titles are not on each of the slides, but in this grouping of remarkable women, and this is just, not even a handful. These are just 5 women that I want to highlight in this moment, because in talking about the Underground Railroad, this secret, sort of loose network, not really reaching a strong organizational body until you cross over into the North, where it is quite organized, where you have alliances and committees that are fundraising and so forth. Women are hard at work behind the scenes, abolitionists. And one of the key roles that they are playing is helping to fund this Underground Railroad. It takes money to bring people from enslavement to freedom, especially once they reach freedom. There are funds needed to pay their way out of enslavement, to pay those who are going to ferry them either literally by boat or by train, or just paying someone to secretly hide those who are enslaved to get them from South Carolina to Virginia to Maryland into Pennsylvania or New York State. These are but a few women who participate in this behind the scenes. And one of the key things that they do are supporting it as abolitionists. So in those northern states, New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, you have during the early part of the Underground Railroad activity, those 1820s, 1830s, you know what they did? What we do right now? How many, and I can kind of see you all, have ever participated in a school bake sale? My mother baked through all of my elementary school years. And usually the Thursday night before the Friday when the bake sale took place, because that's when I would remember to tell her, oh, and by the way, they're going to need some cupcakes. And that's how we fundraise. That is how we raised money for our activities. The same thing, we were but modeling on what mothers and sisters and daughters and aunts had done 100 years earlier, 150 years earlier. There were fundraising fairs on both sides of the Atlantic. Keep in mind that in England, and they had abolished slavery far earlier than we had in the United States. And so there was a fervent move to abolish slavery there. And so during the 20s and 30s, there were these fundraising fairs that were held around Christmas time. And at these fairs, at one fair in 1842 in Philadelphia, there was a poultry stall. Butter was sold, cheese was sold. You would go and you would have a table with chestnuts, refreshments, home-baked goods, homemade goods, sewn quilts, cloths, tablecloths, these sorts of things, clothing items. All of these were sold in hopes of raising funds to support an anti-slavery movement. The National Anti-Slavery Standard, which was a newspaper, one of the most popular of the time period, called these efforts the most efficient agencies of the cause. And one of the largest fairs in Boston during the 1850s raised over $5,000 annually for the American Anti-Slavery Society. These women that are photographed here at the top, let's see if I can make, you can see my mouse there. This is a Marylander, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, and we're going to meet her a little bit later on in the talk, but she's a writer, an orator, an abolitionist, and one from Maryland who raised her voice against the anti-slavery movement. We have at the bottom Abby Kelly Foster, a Quaker from Massachusetts, who early on, she is born in 1811 out of Pelham, Massachusetts. She's a pioneer of abolitionism as well as feminism. She was an itinerant orator against slavery, and by itinerant, it means that she traveled the northern region. She traveled throughout Europe and the United States, speaking fervently against slavery and pushing for its abolition. We have in the upper right corner, Abigail Hopper Gibbons. Now, Miss Gibbons was she's one of my heroes, also a Quaker, from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She's born in 1801. She is of a movement of Quakers during the early part of the 1800s who embraced racial egalitarianism, as Eric Foner, one of the writers of the Underground Railroad experience, calls her. In that, she cast away this idea of separatism, of racial separatism between blacks and whites during this early time period, because why would we not assume that blacks are working just as fervently to abolish slavery as their white counterparts? And so instead of joining in New York in the 1840s, the White Ladies New York City Anti-Slavery Society, she joined the Black Manhattan Anti-Slavery Society to show that there was support and that it should not be separated through the races. And finally, we have Lydia Maria Child, another Massachusetts Quaker who was an author. And she wrote a publication called An Appeal in Favor of That Class of Americans Called Africans, which was an early document that focused on the atrocities of slavery and reasons why it should be abolished during this time period. So to be enslaved, in order to understand what the Underground Railroad movement meant and who it impacted, we have to understand what it meant to be enslaved and who was enslaved. We had children. We had our seniors, our fathers, our uncles, our grandfathers, our best friends. We had our little girls, our daughters, our sisters, our cousins, our fathers, our uncles, our godfathers, and our mothers, our sisters. To understand the Underground Railroad, we have to understand what people wanted to escape from, which means we have to understand what chattel slavery meant in these United States. We all know slavery existed across the globe for thousands of years, but here, in these new United States, slavery takes a different turn. It is a degrading system, one in which it is brutal, and the intention is to purposely deconstruct and destroy that black family. Here you have in chattel slavery a means of using humans as workhorses, as property only, and not seeing and recognizing these beautiful faces, this family unit that exists. So who are they? They're Africans. They're Atlantic Creolized Africans from the Caribbean, from South America, and there are those who are native born to Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, all of these new United States. And how are they brought to us? They are sold across interstate lines. They are imported into the country. They are brought, as I said, from the Caribbean, from the islands. And of course, they are homegrown. They are native to this area. Here is a scene that is all too familiar during the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. This is the auction block. It is at this scene that we truly see the brutality of slavery and its impact on a family. You have a young child who's in the process of being sold away from their mother. There's a scene like this that takes place in the life of one Marylander who is not a woman, but she is. She is the mother of Josiah Henson. And in Charles County, her children, 6 of them, are torn away from her on an auction block. If you are familiar with the story of Josiah Henson, who ends up here in Montgomery County with his mother, who was purchased by Isaac Raleigh, this scene is all too familiar, the auction block. To be enslaved for a woman means work around the clock. There is no window, there is no sunrise to sunset. The workday never really ends. But also to be enslaved means that there are opportunities available. Someone spoke of hope with the Underground Railroad. I'm going to take that and run that as a theme throughout the talk, because the Underground Railroad did give hope to so many. There's a means of escape. And understand this, that the Underground Railroad and self-emancipation, which is what it meant for one who was enslaved to free themselves. You will find the terms that are used, fugitives, runaways, all of these historical terms point to the fact that people stole themselves. As incredulous as that is, how can you steal yourself? You are property. And so in order to gain your own freedom, you have to steal yourself. So this sense of self-emancipation, running away from one's enslaver, is an act of resistance. And this act of resistance took place in many different ways. The enslaved would resist to their situations, from their lifestyle. There would be slowdowns, there would be work downs, there would be equipment that would break down. How many of us have asked our children, have they done their homework yet? And you've got to pull them away from books, you got to pull them away from games, you got to pull them away from toys, you got to pull them away from everything, and they just drag their feet. I have a 9-year-old who drags her feet. I'm like, did you feed the dog? Oh, I got to feed the dog. And she will like move at a snail's pace. And it always reminds me, it's insane that it reminds me of this, but it reminds me of what a work slowdown must have looked like in a field. If you really, you have had it, you are not going to work at a pace that's expected by your enslaver. Will it mean that you will get punished? It might mean that you get punished. Is it going to be worth that punishment? Yes, it's going to be worth that punishment, because I'm not going to make them money today. I'm not going to be productive today. I'm not going to move quickly. Oh, you know that hoe over there? I can't find it. It's broken. Now it's got to go to the blacksmith to get fixed. These are forms of resistance. Self-emancipation is a form of resistance. Women and their roles on the plantation. We have here pictured a number of scenes that have taken place during enslavement, but they also gave way to opportunities for women to both make money during enslavement and also create a means for them to escape when that opportunity presented themselves. Women were laundresses, women were seamstresses, they were cooks, they were nursemaids, they were midwives, they were farmers, you name it. They worked very hard, but thinking about how you take these skills that were every day, that you made no means from them. You gained no means from these skills during enslavement, but the moment the opportunity of freedom comes, you now can translate these skills into a profession, into a career. We have professional laundresses that come into play. Women who are hired out. During enslavement, men and women could be hired out if their enslaver allowed it, which gave them an opportunity to not only make some money for their enslaver, but also there is that strong chance that they could make enough money to either squander away so that they could buy their freedom, or create an opportunity where they could use it to escape. To being sold down south. Remember, we talked about this chattel slavery, and we talked about all of the challenges and the differences. To being sold down south, this is a family working in a cotton field. Could be Georgia, could be Mississippi, could be Alabama. To be sold down south is to be sold to an area where the work is near death. A better scene is the sugarcane fields of Louisiana. If anyone has ever visited New Orleans between the months of June and September, it is hot. It's hot in the morning, it's hot in the midday, it's hot in the evening. If you visited New Orleans in 1822, not only were you met by heat, but you were met by mosquitoes, which meant you were met by disease. Now imagine having to work in these conditions where you have this image on the top right are the slave quarters on a Louisiana sugarcane plantation, and you see dozens of quarters there, dozens of cabins that housed hundreds of enslaved, because to work in a sugarcane field, which we see here on the right, was near fatal on occasions. You have a brutal heat, you have a brutal work system where if someone fell in the middle of a field and they died, their body was simply moved to the side and another person put into their place. You have the cotton fields where your worth is measured by the weight of the cotton that you produced every day. Everyone had to, these bales of cotton, if you've ever imagined how heavy a bowl of cotton is, B-O-L-L, just pick up a bag of cotton balls. It's kind of similar to that. Now imagine how many cotton balls that we get in a plastic bag would have to fill a basket in order to meet a weight requirement that everyone would have to meet. You don't meet your weight requirement, you're punished. So you are worked nearly to death. The tobacco fields of North Carolina, my home, equally brutal. And the work of the enslaved begins as a child. It doesn't begin as a young adult. It doesn't begin as an adult. It begins as a child, and a small child. In North Carolina, we have a tobacco worm, which is about the length of this device, this marker. If you can see it, it's about maybe 4 inches or so. It's a thick, nasty worm, and the job of the preschoolers, the little ones, is to go through these huge plants, pick them off, and kill them. Because if they don't, that tobacco worm destroys the plant, and it impacts the economic value of it. So the work of the enslaved begins in childhood. Who escapes? How do they escape? In this image, which I love, this sense of secrecy that we talked about, you see the men gathered together. Another means of resistance to enslavement would be hiding out, where the enslaved would escape during a short time period. Some think that perhaps it was a practice session, where you would go and hide out for a day or two. You'd get angry at your enslaver. You would go hide out into the woods a day or two. It isn't so much just an act of anger and you just acting out. It's practice. It's practice. It's what do I need to survive in the Great Dismal Swamp that exists in northeastern North Carolina and southeastern Virginia along that border? What would it take? What do I need? So I'm going to hide out for a week. Will I be punished when I get back? Yes. Are they going to kill you? Really? No. Not if you are a young man and you are profitable, you work, you'll be punished. There'll be whippings. But one of the forms of punishment that is the greatest threat to anyone who is attempting freedom is going to be the sale of your family. You might be willing to risk anything to be done to you personally, but you're going to pause when someone holds the threat of selling away your mother, your child, your wife, your brother, your sister. You might think twice. You might think twice and rethink this idea of escape if it means that they are going to receive those lashes that are meant for you. These are the men gathered. Oftentimes, we think of the Underground Railroad, and one of the myths that we have to dispel when we talk about the Underground Railroad at many of our sites is that it is no system of tracks laid out that people actually followed. And some laugh, but you'd be amazed. I've done many hikes and leading folks, and just about every time I get the question, but where are the tracks? And people are serious. They're completely serious. And so we have to explain that it's a system. It's a network, it's a system. And this play on words is happening, this rise of this Underground Railroad movement is happening at the same time that we are getting a rise of the railroads, the B&O railroads coming through Baltimore, and they're moving up and down the East Coast and moving westward and moving products and commodities across the country. And so with that, with this Underground Railroad, the phrases that we learn that are tied to the actual railroad. The passengers are those enslaved. The cargo are those enslaved who are escaping. Stations would be safe houses where those enslaved would be able to find rest, to find assistance. Conductors, we know about conductors. We know about a very famous conductor. And it's interesting, this particular scene is from a book published in 1872, written by William Still, major Pennsylvania freedman who was an abolitionist, and it's depicting an escape from Alabama on a rail car. I talked a little bit about these routes to freedom. Where would you go? Another myth that we bust when we're talking about the Underground Railroad as our sites is that everybody went north. Yeah, not so. There were many places that people went. If you follow some of these red arrows here, if we're leaving from Maryland, for us, the closest route to freedom, if we're leaving from Montgomery County, we are heading straight north, 50 miles up, crossing the Mason-Dixon line into Pennsylvania. If you are further south, or if you're in the St. Mary's area of Maryland, you have here the Chesapeake Bay. Waterways present multiple routes of escape. You can go north, you can go south, you can follow that river. If you're in the DC area, major port, you can take ships that are going to take you further south. You would go to Florida. If it was 1822, 1830, Florida is a Spanish territory. You could escape west of West Virginia, that's noted here, west of Virginia into the Western Territories, Nebraska and Illinois, and all of those places west of that, which are still not yet a part of the United States. They're outside of the United States border. That makes it free territory. You could escape. You could escape south to Mexico. Go even further south to the islands where slavery has already been abolished. Or you could take a schooner all the way east to England or to European countries where slavery has already been abolished. And here is just a map that outlines two of the closest locations. To the left is Waynesboro, Pennsylvania, this encircled right there, and then this is Littleton, Pennsylvania, and this is 1877. This map shows. So here is the Sandy Spring area, sort of where we are here, Gaithersburg, Sandy Spring area here. And then a little further south. Yep. Okay, I can't see that further south. Wiconoco. Oh, Dorchester. There we go. The home of one of our greatest conductors. And then the goal is to get to Pennsylvania. So I mentioned one of the key aids to the Underground Railroad, and that is going to be this gentleman, William Still. Do you all know William Still? You heard of him? Okay. So William Still was a freedman, and he wrote a seminal work in 1872 that would provide a key basis for research into the Underground Railroad for scholars today. And it's here that we find a multitude of stories of freed men and women, well, who became free men and women who escaped from all over the country. One of the quotes from the book is that he says, I quote, "It was my good fortune to lend a helping hand to the weary travelers flying from the land of bondage." His Underground Railroad, a record of facts, authentic narratives, letters, etc., narrating the hardships, hairbreadth escapes, and death struggles of the slaves in their efforts for freedom as relayed by themselves and others or witnessed by the author, forever with sketches, together with sketches of some of the largest stockholders and most liberal aides and advisors of the road, by William Still. It was an important book. That took years. Now, it's published in 1872. 1872 is after slavery has been abolished. It surely could not have been published prior to that because it disclosed the various means in which people escaped. There were 4 methods that would get you to freedom if you were enslaved. One we've talked about, self-emancipation. The other method would be manumission. Manumission is when a slaveholder, an enslaver, would free their enslaved, more than likely at the time of their death. It is that document, their free paper, that shows that they have been legally freed. A third method would be someone who could purchase their freedom. You'd save up enough money, you would sell something, you would purchase your freedom. A fourth would have been through colonization. There was a time period in Maryland that once you were free, you had to leave the state. And then there was a movement that wanted to send free men and women and children who are born here in these United States to Africa so that they could colonize Liberia, send them home, was the sense of it. Yeah, that didn't really become a popular means for it. And then when the Civil War began, there was a fifth method, and that was through enrollment. So let's take a look at our freedom seekers. This is Mrs. Plummer, Emily Plummer. This young man, Joe Wright. We have Emily Kraft. We have Emily and Mary Edmondson. Edmondson. They were conductors. And we have activists. So as we talk about our freedom seekers, this is a runaway ad for one of the most infamous freedom seekers, conductors, and activists that we have the pleasure of calling a native daughter. And in her ad, there are lots of clues as to who this person is. If you all can read, it says, read it from there. It's ran away from the subscriber on Monday the 17th. 3 Negroes, names as follows. Harry, aged about 19, describes he's of dark chestnut color, about 5 feet 8 inches in height. Ben, aged about 25, quick to speak when spoken to, chestnut color, 6 foot. Menti, aged about 27, is of a chestnut color, fine looking, about 5 foot high. Any clues there? They were asking a $100 reward given for each of them and $50 each if they're taken within state, and that was $100 if they are out of state, by Eliza Ann Broaddus, out of Dorchester County. You got it. Our most infamous conductor, Harriet Menti Araminta Ross. Harriet Tubman, who's born in Dorchester County, near and around 1822. Menti, as she was known to her friends, Ross, from the name of her husband. But Harriet Tubman becomes one of the most famous conductors of the Underground Railroad because, as she said herself, that she never ran her train off the track and she never lost a passenger. She made over 13 trips back and forth to Dorchester County. Now, I'm going to disappoint you. She never came into Montgomery County. Never took anyone to freedom from Montgomery County. It was always from the Dorchester County area. She inspired thousands, though. Thousands were inspired by her. Between 1855 and 1860, she made these trips back and forth between Pennsylvania and the eastern shore of Maryland, first securing the freedom of her sister, Rachel, her niece, and her nephew. Those were her goals, but she did bring away nearly 70 individuals. on these 13 trips. She was also a cook and a nurse and a laundress, a teacher, a scout, and spy for the Union forces stationed at Hilton Head in South Carolina and in Florida during the Civil War. And in 1863, under the command of General James Montgomery, Tubman became the first woman to lead an armed raid. And on June 2nd, she led Montgomery's forces, the 2nd South Carolina Unit, up the Combahee River, where they routed rebel forces and freed over 700 enslaved and burned buildings, crops, and stockpiles of munitions and food. If any of you have seen the movie, the recent one that was done on Harriet, it is beautiful. It's one of the most powerful scenes towards the end of the movie, is this depiction of this particular escape. This image of Tubman is one in the center, this Carta de Vista image that we find here is one of the latest images that was secured of Tubman, and it was found and secured by the Smithsonian. And we love them for ensuring that we have that document available. But it shows her during the 1860s, beautiful, young, fiery woman. You can see the fire in her eyes there. This is an image of Tubman with her family. So often this image has been seen and often misrepresented as Harriet Tubman with other freedom seekers. And it's not. It's a photograph of her family taken in Auburn, New York during the late 1880s. We have here with her adopted daughter, Gertie, Nelson Davis, Lee Cheney, Pop Alexander, Walter Green, her aunt, Sarah Parker, and a great niece, Dora Stewart, that are all pictured there. Again, as I said, I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger. She was also an activist. She was one who spoke often about the abolition of slavery. And when the fight for women's rights come on, she was a feminist. And she fought and she spoke against women not having the same rights as men. As we look at these activists and women activists, we have a particular scene, one that is also popular. It is the Underground Railroad, Levi Coffin, depicting Levi Coffin receiving a company of fugitives in the outskirts of Cincinnati, Ohio. And what it depicts are abolitionists Levi Coffin, who's in the top hat here in this image, and then his wife, Catherine Coffin. Because remember, this is about the women of the Underground Railroad. So behind the scenes, women are raising mad money for the efforts for these anti-slavery societies, particularly in the North. But women are also on the front line. We've seen Harriet Tubman. We have here Catherine Coffin and Hannah Haddock, and they're welcoming a group of runaway slaves in Ohio. And one of the things that we have to explain to people, because we have a large community of Quakers or Friends of the Religious Society of Friends, the Religious Society of Friends, as they're also called, here within Montgomery County, particularly in the Sandy Spring and Brookville areas, is that you've got two kind of groups of Quakers at work here during the early 19th century. You've got those that are fired up, ready to do or die, do anything to abolish slavery. They will break that law. They will cross that line. They will be outspoken. They will protest. And then we have a group that they will not go against the canons of their faith, which say that they cannot do illegal acts, and that they will protest in ways that are not challenging amongst their group, that are not going to create strife and so forth. And so one of the things that's interesting for those who are helping people to escape, and one of the things that I usually cover at the beginning that I ask you is who helps those people to escape to freedom, the enslaved, people of African descent? Who helps? Black, white, free, enslaved, northern, southern people are helping. And when asked in the early 1800s, And this particular case is of James Williams, who was an enslaved man who was escaping from Alabama. And he made it to freedom to Pennsylvania on foot in 1837. And he was advised by freedmen to not trust any white people unless, and I quote, they wore a plain, straight collar on a round coat, and they said thee and thou to each other. Then you knew that you were in the company of a Quaker. And while they may not outwardly protest and put up a fight to save you or aid you, they may quietly and simply ignoring and not seeing you run through that field in the middle of the early dawn, knowing that you are not supposed to be there, watching you run across the field, a man and a woman in tattered clothes, barefoot, and not say anything and turn and go back into the house. And when asked later on, didn't you see these two fugitives that we were looking for? Thee has no idea of what you were talking about. Thee was at work. That's aid that's provided. In so many ways, people provided assistance, whether it was subtle or whether it was intentional. There is aid that was provided. And so we have Abigail Hopper Gibbons. Remember I mentioned her? Abigail was one of the feisty ones. Abigail protested in New York. She and her husband were disavowed from their meeting because of their very active and very vocal protestations against enslavement. Here we have another freedom seeker, a local person. The runaway ad says there's a $500 reward from the subscriber for a Negro girl named Anne Maria Weems, bright mulatto, well-grown, about 15 years of age, smart, good-looking, well-known in Rockville, and has a mother and father in Washington, where it's supposed that she will endeavor to go. And this $500 reward will be paid for her apprehension and security and delivery at Charles M. Price's plantation here in Rockville, Maryland. Well, is this who they're looking for? Because this is a young man. This young man is called Joe Wright. And in actuality, this is young Anne Maria Weems, hidden in plain sight, disguised as a young man, helped through the efforts of anti-slavery societies from the North to make her escape to freedom from here in Montgomery County through the District of Columbia on her way to Pennsylvania. So she's born about 1840. Her father was a freedman. Her mother, Arabella Talbot Weems, was enslaved, and so was she. And so they attempted to purchase her from her enslaver so that they could get her to freedom. When that failed, then the plot was planted in order to ferry her away to freedom by disguising her as a young man, making her pretend to be the footman of a doctor in the D.C. area where she never had to say anything. She just had to walk like a boy and just help out with the horses and so forth and help the good doctor in and out of the carriage until she could make it to freedom, where she did, and where she ended up making it all the way to Buxton, Canada, to live a life in freedom. There's our freedom seeker hiding in plain sight. Another strong woman who was a freedom seeker who hid in plain sight, Ellen and William Craft. Ellen and William Craft, and Ellen, who was a quadroon, which had a very fair skin, disguised herself as a young white cotton planter, because this is Ellen in this image. You see, cross-dressing was an early thing. It could save your life. I'm just saying. So she disguised herself as a young white cotton planter traveling with his slave, William, her husband. And it was William who came up with the scheme to hide in plain sight. But ultimately, it was Ellen who convincingly masked her race, her gender, and her social status during a 4-day trip from Georgia through to Pennsylvania by rail. And the costume that you see, the dress that she's worn there, and she's dressed as a young man, but at some point during the trip, and she was advised she couldn't speak, and so she was sick is what he would tell people, and that she had an injury to her hand so she couldn't write, so he would write for her, and he would check her in, because there is no way, even though we see in that top image that she's very fair complected, that she could have passed as a white woman, but no white woman during the 1830s would dare to have traveled with a male servant who was enslaved, especially an African man? Absolutely not. It was unheard of. But as a young man, she could have. That would have been expected. And so that is how they made their escape to freedom, hiding in plain sight. So in this attempt to get to freedom and making their way north, we have one of the largest attempted slave escapes in American history that happens right here in the DMV area. And it was April 15th, 1848. And all throughout this night, the enslaved slipped out of their masters' houses and they crept through the streets of Washington, D.C., to a destination of a ship called the Pearl, which was a schooner that promised freedom. Remember that hope? They did all of this with the hope to get to freedom. They escaped aboard a ship called the Pearl. And 77 people hoped to reach freedom on this Pearl. And they all assembled on this trip, and freedom was only 225 miles away, and that was if they actually made it. On this journey traveled 6 members of a family that lived around the corner. This is an image of Mary and Emily Edmondson. Mary is the older of the 2 sisters that is pictured here. Emily and Mary went with their 4 brothers. Of the 14 children who were born to their father and mother, Paul and Amelia Edmondson, who lived right where, oh my gosh, it's right up the street, Leisure World area is the home, the original home of the Edmondson family. And it's there that they lived. And 6 of the 14 children attempted to escape to freedom on this voyage on the Pearl. Her brother Samuel, Paul Jennings, and also with the Senator Daniel Webster's butler, and along with Captain Daniel Drayton and William Chaplin. William Chaplin is an activist and an abolitionist who has quite the reputation here within Montgomery County. If you travel along the Eastern Boulevard or Eastern Street that separates DC and Silver Spring, there is a plaque there that marks the William Chaplin arrest, where he was arrested here in DC for attempting to aid freedom seekers, and he was arrested here in the area. They're not convicted and not held in prison. But Chaplin was an operative who was assisting to have these 77 people escaped. And what happened was their ship ran into problems all along the Chesapeake Bay area. And the aftermath of that was brutal. If you see here, the Pearl was captured just where the bay, where they're coming out of the Potomac River, right at Point Lookout, right where the bay and it meets. The ship ran into trouble. And what happened was a brutal aftermath for those slaves who dared to escape. All of them were sold to plantations further south as punishment. And as I mentioned, being sold south is possibly one of the worst of the punishments that can happen. But it was a common practice that ensured hard labor and definite separation from their family, and sometimes death, depending where they were sold to. Now, Drayton and Sayers were tried. They are the captains, and they were convicted of 77 counts of illegally transporting a slave and aiding a slave, and they were thrown into jail when they couldn't pay their fines, and they only left 4 years later when President Fillmore, who was sometimes accused of being an abolitionist by his Southern enemies, pardoned them. And what happened to the poor Edmondson sisters is that they were to be sold into slavery in New Orleans, into the state of prostitution. And so it was through the efforts of Northern anti-slavery vigilance committees that there was a fund raised, and one of the members that helped in that was connected to Harriet Beecher Stowe. And so they aided in having their freedom secured by purchasing them from the life that awaited them in New Orleans, these young girls. They went on to school at Oberlin, of which Harriet Beecher Stowe helped to fund their education there. And Mary did not make it, she did not survive into adulthood. She died a younger woman, but Emily lives out her life here in Washington, D.C. Now, in 1850, if you are aware of the Fugitive Slave Act, there is a change that takes place for those that are assisting in helping to gain those to freedom. What happens in the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act is that the stakes are higher. Now, if you are escaping to the north, you're no longer safe, because this slave act allows slave catchers and enslavers to send them into the north to capture, bring you back to the South. And not only if you are one who has sought their freedom and settled there, you could be born free in these northern states and be captured and sold into slavery. Solomon Northrop is a case in point that we are quite familiar with. If you've seen 12 Years a Slave or read that narrative of one who was born free and captured and taken into slavery, this could happen. So someone mentioned Canada as a destination and an important place within the Underground Railroad. Now, freedom meant you had to leave the boundaries of these United States. It meant also for those who were assisting anyone in the escape to freedom, now you faced fines, you faced severe punishment, you faced jail time, which didn't exist earlier, which means for a farm family in Pennsylvania that may have provided aid to those escaping enslaved people that moved through their yards, and they may have placed them on a wagon and taken them on into Philadelphia from Littleton, Pennsylvania. If they're caught and they're fined with $1,000 and it's 1840, $1,000 could have been the value of their farm. And so now the farm is lost. The father is imprisoned. What happens to the family? They become destitute. They're ruined. So the stakes are very high during the 1850s after the Fugitive Slave Act. The Edmond sisters, before they settle into their lives, become activists once they are free. This is an image from 1850 that is a gathering in New York, in Cazenovia, New York. There is a meeting in 1853, and you have them. This is Emily, who's pictured here in the shawl, and right next to her is another familiar native son of Maryland, Frederick Douglass. And it is here, this is a record of a convention in 1850 in which they are petitioning for the abolition of slavery. I'm going to move through quickly. In Alexandria, Virginia, where the Edmonds and many of the enslaved that were escaping on the Pearl were held on Duke Street at a slave pen. The time period, there is now in existence a beautiful bronze sculpture. It's about 10 foot high, and it sits on Duke Street by the sculptor Eric Bloom, and it is worth a visit. Remember, I mentioned Harriet Beecher Stowe, who has a tie to another native son here in Maryland. Her Uncle Tom's Cabin, another Quaker, who is a novelist, a writer, an activist, publishes in 1852 this anti-slavery document, begins as a series that is written. Uncle Tom's Cabin, or Life Among the Lowly, is meant to move people towards the abolition of slavery. And within this book, she documents and captures the lives of those who were enslaved, one of which was Josiah Henson. Of freedom seekers, very quickly, we have Emily Saunders Plummer. And Emily Saunders Plummer is a native Marylander also, who's born on the Three Sisters Plantation in Lanham, Maryland. And she grew up with many other children, of which her mother had 23. And and the many other children, 23 of them, that her mother had. And Emily saw so many of her family being sold off and sold at auction. And on its own, Emily's story is special for its ordinary. It's an ordinary story. It's an everyday story. There's nothing that stands out about the life she was born into and the life that she lived. But because she was a devoted daughter, a sister, and then happily married, and then became a mother who was dealing with the daily trials and tribulations that make up anybody's life. But what makes her story extraordinary in the awfulness is that a part of her life that she was enslaved, and that she not only suffered herself, but she saw all of her loved ones mistreated, sold away, separated from her each other. And her story is educational and inspirational because she remained illiterate throughout her life. But what we know of the enslaved's illiteracy does not mean that they were ignorant. It does not mean that this group of people, millions, were stupid or could not learn or were not keenly intelligent. And so do not, as you learn and read through history of those who were enslaved, when it says so many of them were illiterate, so many of a lot of people, black and white, were illiterate as we move through the 19th century and as we move into the early 20th century. So illiteracy will not always define your cognitive abilities, if I can say that. So with Emily was one who attempted escape many times. And so Emily and her husband, Adam Plummer, they had secretly plotted an escape in 1845, and it was a tremendous risk that they would take with young children. And although her husband told her not to tell anybody, please don't tell anybody about the plans, well, Emily did what many of us did. You told that one favorite sister, that one favorite best friend, don't you tell anybody, swear, pinky swear, put your hand on all kind of Bibles, don't tell anybody. And she did. And what happened? It happened often. They disclosed the plans. We don't know how they disclosed, whether they were threatened, whether it just slipped, whether they gave a clue. But that secrecy is what's key to saving so many people as they made their way to freedom. And so this time, Emily was a cook in her owner's home. And she was then made to work in the fields because they were caught. And as a punishment, she was made to work into the fields. And then later, her children were put up to sale. And it was the birth of her daughter, Julia, that caused the owner to sell Emily's sister instead. But after her death, Emily and her children ended up getting sold. But in the end, in Emily's story, I'll move it forward, that Emily was defiant. Her enslaver was cruel, and he kicked and he swore at them, but Emily fought back. I mean, literally fought back. She would fight back when he would attack her children and them, but she was also the cook. You rarely got the cook mad, because what could the cook do? The cook could poison you. So there's only so much that you're going to take. And so the family that she worked for, that she was enslaved by, the Thompsons, they ended up moving to Ellicott Mills. And in her defiance and defense of herself, her skills as a cook are what saved her. And she was a most reliable and trusted servant who kept that family together. That's Emily's story. I'm going to wrap up with the last story of an activist, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, who's born in Baltimore, Maryland in 1825. And she taught in Pennsylvania and Ohio for 2 years, but she traveled the U.S. speaking on the abolitionist circuit. And she assisted in the Underground Railroad. She's a part of that club at the beginning, those images of those 5 women that I told you worked behind the scenes, that fundraised, that gave speeches, that wrote newspapers, that edited anti-slavery documents and newspapers. Well, she was a writer. She was a prolific and celebrated writer and a poet. We want more soul, higher cultivation of all spiritual faculties, she said. We need more unselfishness, earnestness, and integrity. We need men and women whose hearts are the homes of high and lofty enthusiasm and a noble devotion to the cause of emancipation, who are ready and willing to lay time, talent, and money on the altar of universal freedom. That is what she wrote in 1859 in the Anglo-African magazine. Lastly, the poem that's here, Bury Me in Freedom, was published in 1864, which is the year in which Maryland abolishes slavery, on November the 1st in 1864, a year before slavery is completely abolished through the 13th Amendment and made illegal. Bury me in a free land, make me a grave where'er you will, in a lowly plain or lofty hill. Make it among earth's humblest graves, but not in a land where men are slaves. I ask no monument, proud and high, to arrest the gaze of the passers-by. All that my yearning spirit craves is bury me not in a land of slaves. I thank you all for your time.
Cheryl will take the questions.
Yes.
Ushers, please move forward.